Sophie Bennett couldn't feel her feet anymore. 8 hours into her double shift at Bellini's, the fancy Italian restaurant downtown, her black work shoes pinched in all the wrong places. Still, she forced a smile as she balanced 3 plates of steaming pasta along her arm. Another 3 hours to go. Just another Friday night. Table 7 needs more bread, called May, rushing past with a tray of wine glasses. Her usually neat bun was coming undone, a sure sign the night was getting hectic. On it, Sophie replied, delivering the pasta dishes with practiced grace. Here you are. The fettuccine with wild mushrooms, gnocchi with truffle oil, and the seafood linguine. Can I get you anything else? The businessmen barely looked up from their phones, waving her away. Sophie bit her tongue. At least they hadn't called her sweetie or tried to grab her wrist like some customers did. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. Luis, the head chef, was shouting orders in a mix of English and Spanish. Pots clanged, flames whooshed from the stovetop, and the dishwasher hissed like an angry cat. Bennett! Her manager, Peter, beckoned urgently from the corner of the kitchen. His thinning hair was damp with sweat, his tie askew. I need to talk to you. Sophie's stomach dropped. Last time Peter had pulled her aside like this, he'd cut everyone's hours because business was slow. She couldn't afford another cut. Not with rent due next week and her student loan payment already 2 weeks late. Everything okay? She asked, tucking a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. The Calloway party, Peter said, his voice low and tense. They've booked the entire back room. 15 people, maybe 20. Big spenders, Sophie nodded. Everyone knew about the Calloway party. Richard Calloway owned half the real estate in the business district and tipped generously when he was happy. When he wasn't happy, restaurants lost their leases. They just called to say they're bringing their own wine. Vintage stuff, really expensive. I need someone with steady hands to serve it. Someone who won't spill a single drop. Sophie had been hoping to avoid the Calloway party. Rich people were the worst tippers, ironically. They'd run her ragged with special requests and complicated substitutions, then leave exactly 15%. And, Peter continued, they've requested you specifically. Me? Sophie's eyebrows shot up. Why would they ask for me? Peter shrugged. No idea. Maybe you served one of them before and made a good impression. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Richard Calloway asked for you by name and you're going to give them the best service they've ever had. He squeezed her shoulder a bit too tightly. Our lease is up for renewal next month. We need Calloway happy. Understand? Sophie understood perfectly. Her job depended on it. They'll be here in 30 minutes, Peter added. Freshen up. And Sophie, don't talk about yourself unless they ask. These people don't care about your life story. As if she needed the reminder. 6 months at Bellini's had taught her that the wealthy preferred their servers to be invisible. Silent ghosts that kept wine glasses full and whisked away empty plates. In the staff bathroom, Sophie splashed cold water on her face. The mirror revealed dark circles under her hazel eyes. She reapplied a touch of mascara and lip gloss, more out of habit than vanity. Her dark blue Bellini's uniform fit loosely now. She'd lost weight in the past few months, skipping meals to save money. 26 years old and waiting tables. Not exactly where she'd imagined herself 5 years ago when she'd earned that scholarship to the prestigious Westfield Conservatory of Music. The girl in those old photos, sitting confidently at grand pianos, smiling with her music professors, seemed like a stranger now. You okay in there? May's voice called through the door. The Calloway party just arrived. Coming. Sophie dried her hands and straightened her uniform. No time for regrets or what-ifs. The back room of Bellini's had been transformed. The regular tables had been pushed together to form one long dining surface, draped in crisp white linen. Candles flickered in expensive-looking holders, and fresh flower arrangements perfumed the air. Standing by the entrance, Sophie took a deep breath before pushing through the door. 15 well-dressed people turned to look at her. Designer suits, glittering jewelry, perfect hair. In the corner stood a gleaming black grand piano, a permanent fixture in the room that served only as decoration. No one had ever played it, as far as Sophie knew. A tall man with silver-streaked dark hair approached. Richard Calloway. Sophie recognized him from his photos in the business section of the local paper. You must be Sophie, he said, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone used to being in charge. Peter speaks highly of you. Sophie doubted that very much, but she smiled. Welcome to Bellini's, Mr. Calloway. I'll be taking care of you and your guest tonight. Excellent. We've brought some special wines. He gestured to several wooden cases being carried in by a nervous-looking Peter. They need to breathe. Can you handle that? Of course, sir. Sophie moved toward the wines, eager to have something to do with her hands. The next hour passed in a blur of uncorking bottles, serving appetizers and fielding increasingly loud conversations as the alcohol took effect. The group was celebrating something, a business deal from what Sophie could gather. They ordered everything on the menu, barely touching most dishes before requesting the next course. As Sophie poured a ruby-red Barolo into Mr. Calloway's glass, she couldn't help noticing the piano. The lid was up, revealing the strings inside like the rib cage of some magnificent beast. Her fingers twitched involuntarily. Do you play? A woman with a sleek silver bob and sharp eyes caught Sophie staring. Oh no, I mean not really, Sophie stammered, nearly spilling the wine. Not anymore. What a shame, the woman said, turning back to her companion. That piano just sits there gathering dust. The evening progressed, plates coming and going, wine flowing freely. Sophie's feet screamed in protest as she made her 20th trip to the kitchen. The party grew louder, faces flushed with wine and good food. Then came the moment that would change everything. A heavy-set man with a booming voice, someone had called him Frank, stood swaying slightly. Richie, this is a fantastic dinner, but where's the entertainment? You promised us something special. Mr. Calloway looked momentarily flustered. I thought the company would be entertainment enough, Frank. Come on. Your parties always have something, a string quartet, a jazz singer. You're not going cheap on us, are you? Frank laughed too loudly, but there was an edge to his voice. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Sophie, returning with coffee service, froze in the doorway. The tension was thick enough to touch. Peter appeared beside her, whispering urgently. We need to do something. Calloway looks angry. What am I supposed to do? Sophie whispered back, I don't know. Can't you sing or something? Before Sophie could respond, Peter stepped into the room with a broad, false smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Calloway, I apologize for the oversight. We actually had planned a small musical interlude for your enjoyment. Sophie's blood ran cold. What was he doing? In fact, Peter continued, sweat beading on his forehead, we're very fortunate that one of our staff is quite accomplished on the piano. He turned to Sophie with pleading eyes. Sophie, would you favor our guests with a piece? The room went quiet. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others skeptical. Mr. Calloway raised an eyebrow. I don't... Sophie began. Please. Peter mouthed silently, desperation written all over his face. Sophie looked at the piano. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd touched a piano keyboard, not since that final day at the conservatory, when she'd walked off stage mid-recital, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hit the right notes, the pressure crushing her chest until she couldn't breathe. I don't think that's necessary, Mr. Calloway began, looking embarrassed. No, I want to hear this, Frank insisted, clapping his hands. Let's see what the waitress can do. Sophie felt her face burning. The word waitress had come out sounding like nothing. It's fine, Mr. Calloway said quietly. You don't have to. Yes, she does, Frank interrupted. Your man here promised entertainment. Let's hear it. Sophie looked at Peter, at the desperate plea in his eyes. She thought of the restaurant lease, of her co-workers who needed their jobs as badly as she did, of her own overdue rent and the growing pile of bills on her kitchen counter. With wooden legs, she walked toward the piano. The gleaming black surface reflected the candlelight, looking both inviting and terrifying. Sophie sat down on the bench, adjusting it automatically as she'd done thousands of times before. The guests watched with varying expressions: amusement, second-hand embarrassment, boredom. They expected her to play chopsticks or fumble through heart and soul. Sophie placed her trembling hands on the cool keys. What could she play? Her mind went blank. Then her fingers seemed to decide for themselves, finding the opening notes of a piece she'd once known better than her own name. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece that had won her the scholarship. The piece she'd failed to complete at her last recital. Sophie took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes hung in the air like delicate glass ornaments. Sophie's fingers moved tentatively across the keys, her body rigid with tension. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it over the music. It had been 3 years, but her fingers remembered what her mind tried to forget. The opening melody of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 flowed from her hands, gentle, questioning, almost hesitant, just like her. The restaurant's piano wasn't perfectly tuned, but its warm tone filled the private dining room. Sophie kept her eyes fixed on the keys, too afraid to look up. She could feel the weight of stares from Mr. Calloway and his guests. The silence behind her was absolute. Even the kitchen staff had quieted, peering through the partially open door. As the piece progressed, something strange began to happen. The familiar notes wrapped around Sophie like an old blanket, comforting and warm. Her shoulders slowly relaxed. Her breathing deepened. The tremble in her hands steadied. It was like reuniting with an old friend she'd desperately missed. When she reached the middle section where the tempo picks up and the music grows more complex, Sophie's muscle memory took over completely. Her fingers danced across the keys, building the intensity that made this piece famous. Notes cascaded like waterfalls, one flowing into the next with growing confidence. For the first time in years, Sophie wasn't thinking about student debt or overdue rent or aching feet. She wasn't worried about tips or difficult customers or her manager's desperate eyes. She was simply playing, the way she used to before everything fell apart. Behind her, someone gasped quietly when she executed a particularly difficult run without hesitation. Another person shifted in their chair. A glass clinked as it was set down carefully on the table. But Sophie barely registered these sounds, lost in the familiar landscape of the music. As she approached the powerful, thundering conclusion of the piece, Sophie finally dared to close her eyes. Her body swayed with the music now, her face transformed. Anyone watching closely would have seen the exact moment when the waitress disappeared and the musician emerged from hiding. The final notes echoed through the room, lingering in the air long after Sophie's hands stilled on the keys. She sat motionless, suddenly aware of what she'd done. Cold reality crashed in. She'd played for the first time since her breakdown at the conservatory. In front of strangers, in her waitress uniform. At her boss's desperate request, heat rushed to her face. What had she been thinking? These wealthy guests hadn't come for an amateur piano recital by their server. They wanted professional entertainment, not... The silence broke with a single pair of hands clapping. Then another joined. And another. Soon the entire room filled with applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. Sophie turned slowly on the bench. Mr. Calloway was standing, his expression one of complete astonishment. Frank, the loud man who had demanded entertainment, was blinking rapidly as if fighting back tears. The silver-haired woman who had asked if Sophie played wore a knowing smile, nodding with approval. "My God," said Frank, his earlier arrogance replaced with wonder. Where did you learn to play like that?" Sophie's mouth felt dry. "I studied at Westfield Conservatory," she said softly, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "For a while. Westfield?" The silver-haired woman leaned forward. "That's one of the best music schools in the country. What are you doing waiting tables?" Peter, hovering anxiously by the door, shot Sophie a warning look. "Don't tell your life story," his eyes said. "Don't make this about you," but Mr. Calloway raised his hand. "I think we'd all like to know." His voice was gentler than before. That was extraordinary. Sophie's fingers traced the edge of the piano bench. These people didn't want her sad story. They were just being polite. But when she looked up, she saw genuine curiosity in their faces. "I had a scholarship," she explained, the words coming out haltingly.
"Full ride."
"I was in my 3rd year when..." She swallowed hard, unsure how to explain the crushing anxiety, the panic attacks, the feeling of drowning under expectations. "I got overwhelmed. During my junior recital, I just couldn't finish. I walked off stage and never went back." She expected pity or worse, judgment. Instead, the silver-haired woman nodded thoughtfully. "Performance anxiety. It happens to the best. Even to professionals," added a younger man with glasses who hadn't spoken before. "My cousin plays with the symphony. Says half the orchestra is on beta blockers before performances." Mr. Calloway studied Sophie with new interest. "And now you work here." It wasn't a question, but Sophie nodded anyway. Bills don't pay themselves. An uncomfortable truth hovered in the air. That someone with her talent was serving pasta, to pay rent while a dusty piano sat unused in the corner of an overpriced restaurant. Play. Something else, said the silver-haired woman. It wasn't a request. Sophie glanced at Peter, who nodded vigorously, his earlier warning forgotten. She turned back to the piano, considering. The Chopin had broken through a wall inside her. Now other pieces were rushing back, clamoring to be played. Her fingers found the keys before she'd fully decided. Debussy's Clair de Lune. A complete contrast to the dramatic Chopin. This was moonlight on water, gentle and dreamy. Sophie played it as if telling a secret, her touch delicate and precise. The guests fell under its spell, some closing their eyes, others watching her hands with fascination. When she finished, the applause was immediate. This time Sophie managed a small smile. "Another," called Frank, who now looked completely sober despite the wine he'd consumed. Sophie played Liszt's Liebestraum No. 3, The Love Dream, with its tender beginning and passionate middle section. Her body moved more freely now, her confidence growing with each piece. The kitchen staff had abandoned all pretense of working and stood openly watching from the doorway. May's mouth hung slightly open. Luis, the chef, kept shaking his head in disbelief. By the time Sophie finished the list, the mood in the room had completely transformed. The business dinner had become something else entirely, an impromptu recital by a hidden talent. The guests looked at their server with new respect, seeing beyond the uniform to the artist underneath. "Where's your phone?" the bespectacled man asked suddenly. "Someone should be recording this." Sophie laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her. "In the break room. We're not allowed to have them during shifts." "Well, that's ridiculous," said the silver-haired woman. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out her own phone. "Do you mind? My daughter is a music teacher. She won't believe this unless I show her." Before Sophie could answer, Mr. Calloway stepped forward. "I think we should ask Sophie if she's comfortable being recorded, Diane." He looked at Sophie with unexpected kindness. "This isn't part of your job description. We've already imposed enough." Something about his consideration made Sophie's throat tighten. She was used to being invisible, her feelings irrelevant to the customers she served. "It's okay," she said. "I don't mind." The woman, Diane, positioned her phone while Sophie turned back to the piano. What should she play next? Something had unlocked inside her, something she thought was lost forever. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor with its thunderous chords and driving rhythm, the most technically challenging piece yet. As she played, she caught glimpses of the guests' reactions. Widened eyes, dropped jaws, heads nodding in time with the music. In the middle of a particularly difficult passage, a string inside the piano snapped with a discordant twang. Sophie faltered for just a moment, then adjusted instantly, working around the broken string to finish the piece. It was the kind of recovery only a highly trained musician could make, so smooth that most of the guests didn't even notice anything had gone wrong. But Diane noticed. And so did a quiet woman in the corner who had barely spoken all evening. When Sophie finished, this woman approached the piano while the others applauded. "You compensated for that broken string beautifully," she said quietly. Most amateurs would have stopped playing. Sophie blinked in surprise. "You have a good ear." "I should. I'm on the board of the City Symphony Orchestra." The woman extended her hand. "Eleanor Reed." Sophie's heart skipped. Everyone in the music world knew Eleanor Reed, the formidable director of the Riverside Music Foundation, which funded music education and supported promising artists. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Reed," Sophie said, suddenly aware of her wrinkled waitress uniform and messy hair. Eleanor waved away the formality. "The honor is mine. I came to this dinner as a favor to Richard, expecting to be bored by business talk. Instead, I discover a hidden gem." She studied Sophie with piercing blue eyes. "Why did you really leave Westfield?" The directness of the question caught Sophie off guard. The room had quieted, everyone waiting for her answer. "Panic attacks," Sophie admitted, deciding on complete honesty. "Stage fright so bad I couldn't breathe. My hands would shake so much I couldn't play the right notes. My professor called it a tragic waste of potential." The memory still stung. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Performance anxiety can be managed, you know. With proper coaching, medication if needed. Maybe," Sophie said, though she wasn't convinced. "But by the time I realized that, I'd lost my scholarship and couldn't afford to go back." Mr. Calloway, who had been listening quietly, cleared his throat. I think we've taken up enough of Sophie's time. She still has a job to do. He turned to Peter, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes. I hope you're paying her well. You have a treasure here. Peter sputtered something about Sophie being a valued employee. As Sophie stood to return to her serving duties, Eleanor caught her arm. Don't disappear on me, she said firmly. I want to talk more. After your shift. Sophie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she walked back toward the kitchen on unsteady legs, she heard the conversations resume behind her, all centered on what they'd just witnessed. Did you see her hands? The technique was flawless. That Rachmaninoff piece took my nephew 6 months to learn. Richard, where on earth did you find this place? In the kitchen, her co-workers stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. What was that? May whispered, grabbing Sophie's arm. Since when can you play like that? Sophie shrugged, still processing what had happened herself. I used to play. A long time ago. A long time ago? Girl, you play like you were born with those piano keys under your fingers. Luis, the perpetually grumpy chef, actually smiled at her. My cousin would pay good money for lessons from someone who plays like you. Sophie didn't know how to respond to any of it. For 3 years, she'd locked that part of herself away, convinced it was gone forever. Now it had burst free in the most unexpected way, in front of the most unexpected audience. And Eleanor Reed wanted to speak with her after her shift. Eleanor Reed, who could open doors Sophie thought were permanently closed. As she picked up a tray of desserts to bring back to the party, Sophie's hands were steady. The music still echoed in her mind, along with a dangerous, wonderful feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years. Hope. The rest of Sophie's shift passed in a blur. She moved between kitchen and dining room on autopilot, serving desserts and pouring coffee while her mind replayed those moments at the piano. Her fingers still tingled, as if reluctant to return to carrying trays when they'd just remembered their true purpose. The Callaway party lingered longer than expected. What had been scheduled as a 2-hour business dinner stretched past midnight as guests ordered after-dinner drinks and continued discussing Sophie's performance. She caught snippets of their conversations as she cleared dessert plates. Reminds me of that pianist we saw in Vienna. Technique like that doesn't just disappear. Wasted talent. If you ask me, this last comment, from a round-faced man with a bow tie, made Sophie's cheeks burn. She wasn't sure if he meant her talent was currently being wasted on serving food, or if he thought her playing itself was a waste. Either way, it stung. Diane, the silver-haired woman who had recorded Sophie's performance, stopped her as she collected empty coffee cups. I sent the video to my daughter, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. She teaches music at Westlake Prep. She's already asked if you give private lessons. Sophie nearly dropped the cups. Lessons? I haven't taught anyone, but you could, Diane insisted. Claire says you have exceptional technique. She pays her daughter's current teacher $80 per hour, and that woman doesn't play half as well as you. $80 an hour. Sophie's mind reeled at the number. She made that much in a full day of waitressing if tips were good. Before she could respond, Peter appeared at her side, his manager smile firmly in place. I hope everything was satisfactory this evening, he said to Diane, smoothly taking the cups from Sophie's hands. Sophie, why don't you bring the check to Mr. Callaway? As Sophie walked away, she heard Diane say, You have no idea what a gem you have working for you. Peter's reply was lost as Sophie approached Mr. Callaway with the leather folder containing the bill. The amount inside made her eyes widen, over $3,000 for one dinner. That was more than 2 months' rent for her tiny studio apartment. Mr. Callaway barely glanced at the total before sliding a black credit card into the folder. The service was excellent, he said, looking directly at Sophie. And the entertainment was unexpected. Thank you, Sophie replied, unsure what else to say. Should she apologize for disrupting his dinner? Thank him for the opportunity? Pretend the whole thing never happened? Eleanor wants to speak with you, he continued, nodding toward the elegant woman who sat alone now at the far end of the table. The other guests were putting on coats and saying goodbyes. She's quite interested in your situation. Sophie nodded, suddenly nervous again. Eleanor Reed's opinion could open doors in the music world, or confirm that Sophie had been right to walk away. I'll be back with your receipt, Sophie said, taking the folder. When she returned, Mr. Callaway was waiting by the door with his guests. He signed the receipt with a flourish, then paused before handing it back. I meant what I said earlier. You have a remarkable gift. He hesitated, then added, whatever happened at that conservatory, don't let it define you. With that, he joined his departing friends, leaving Sophie holding the leather folder. Inside, she found the receipt with a tip amount that made her gasp. $5,000. More than she'd make in 2 months at Bellini's. She stared at the number, certain it was a mistake. Maybe he'd had too much wine. Maybe he'd meant to write 500. She should tell him, call him back. He doesn't make mistakes with numbers. Sophie turned to find Eleanor Reed watching her, an amused expression on her face. Richard made his fortune being precise with decimal points, Eleanor continued. If he tipped you $5,000, that's exactly what he intended. But it's too much, Sophie protested. I just played a few pieces. You did much more than that. Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her. Sit with me for a moment. Sophie glanced around. The restaurant was empty except for staff cleaning up. Peter caught her eye and nodded eagerly. Clearly, he had no problem with her sitting down with a board member of the City Symphony. I won't keep you long, Eleanor said as Sophie sat. I'm sure you're exhausted after your shift, but I need to ask you something important. She leaned forward, her gaze direct and piercing. Do you still want to play? Professionally, I mean. The question hit Sophie like a physical blow. Did she want to play? She'd buried that dream so deeply she'd almost forgotten it existed. After tonight, though, I don't know, she answered honestly. Until tonight, I hadn't touched a piano in 3 years. And yet you played Chopin, Debussy, Liszt, and Rachmaninoff from memory, Eleanor pointed out. Most pianists practice daily to maintain that level of technique. You walked away for 3 years and can still play like that. She shook her head in amazement. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Sophie stared at her hands, server's hands now with small burns from hot plates and rough skin from cleaning chemicals. But tonight, for a little while, they had been a musician's hands again. The panic attacks, Sophie said quietly, they're real. I can't perform under pressure. I've tried. Have you tried with proper support? Coaching, therapy, even medication if necessary? Eleanor asked. These issues can be managed, Sophie. They don't have to end a career before it begins. I can't afford any of that, Sophie replied. I can barely afford groceries most weeks, Eleanor smiled. That's where I come in. The Riverside Music Foundation has programs specifically for talented musicians facing barriers, financial, psychological, or otherwise. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. We have a special recital series starting next month. Small venue, supportive audience. We provide coaching beforehand to help with performance anxiety. She slid the card across the table. I'd like you to be part of it. Sophie stared at the card but didn't take it. I don't even have a piano to practice on. We can arrange practice time at the foundation, Eleanor countered. 2 hours daily, more if you need it. I have a job, Sophie said, gesturing to her uniform. Bills to pay. The recital series comes with a stipend. Not enough to live on, perhaps, but enough to reduce your hours here. Eleanor pushed the card closer. All I'm asking is that you think about it. Sophie finally picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed logo. The Riverside Music Foundation was housed in a beautiful historic building downtown, a place Sophie used to walk past on her way to classes before everything fell apart. Why me? She asked suddenly. You must meet talented musicians all the time. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. My brother was like you, she said finally. Extraordinary talent. He studied at Juilliard, was headed for a brilliant career. Then anxiety took over. Back then, this was 30 years ago, no one talked about mental health in the music world. You either handled the pressure or you didn't. She looked down at her hands, elegant with age spots and a simple gold wedding band. He didn't. One panic attack too many and he walked away. Became an accountant, never played again except at home, alone. Her eyes met Sophie's. I've always wondered what might have happened if someone had reached out to him, given him another chance. The weight of those words hung between them. Sophie thought about how she'd felt tonight, playing again after so long. The rush of it, the sense of coming home. Write your number on the back, Eleanor said, nodding at the card in Sophie's hand. I'll call you tomorrow. We can talk more when you're not exhausted. Sophie found a pen in her apron pocket and wrote her number with shaking fingers. As she handed back the card, the kitchen door swung open and May emerged with her coat and bag. "Sophie, you coming? Luis says he'll drop us at the bus stop if we leave now." Eleanor stood, tucking the card into her purse. "Think about it," she said simply. "That's all I ask." After Eleanor left, Sophie helped finish cleaning the dining room, moving in a daze. Her co-workers kept shooting her curious glances, but no one mentioned the piano playing directly, as if they were afraid bringing it up might break some sort of spell. Only May, as they waited for Luis to bring his car around, dared to ask, "So are you, like, secretly famous or something?" Sophie laughed, the sound surprising her. "Hardly. I'm just a waitress who used to play piano." "Used to?" May raised an eyebrow. "Girl, I saw you tonight. That's not used to. That's who you are, who you are." The words echoed in Sophie's mind during the car ride home, during the slow climb up 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, during the mechanical routine of removing her uniform and washing her face. Her tiny studio looked different somehow, as if the furniture had shifted while she was gone. Or maybe it was Sophie who had changed, seeing her surroundings through new eyes. The stack of overdue bills on the counter, the cheap futon that served as both bed and couch, the small bookshelf containing her few salvaged music theory textbooks, hidden behind romance novels as if she was ashamed of them, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. Sophie opened the window to let in the cool night air. 3 floors below, the city hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens. She leaned on the windowsill, looking up at the sliver of moon visible between buildings. Her phone buzzed with a text, probably May wanting to talk more about the evening. But when Sophie checked the screen, it was a number she didn't recognize. The message read, "This is Diane Williams from the dinner tonight. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Eleanor. My daughter Claire is very interested in meeting you. The video I sent her has been shared among her music colleagues. They're quite impressed. Please call me tomorrow if you're interested in discussing teaching opportunities." While Sophie was still staring at this message, another text arrived from a different unknown number. "Sophie, Richard Calloway here. Hope it's not too late to message. Just wanted to say your playing made a routine business dinner memorable. My wife is on the committee for the Children's Hospital benefit next month. We're looking for performers. Paid gig, of course. Let me know if you might be interested." Sophie sat heavily on her futon, phone clutched in her hand. After 3 years of silence and struggle, suddenly her phone was lighting up with opportunities, all because she'd been forced to play a piano in a restaurant. She thought of Mr. Calloway's generous tip. With that money, she could pay off her most pressing debts. Maybe even take a week off to practice before meeting with Eleanor about the recital series. For the first time in years, doors were opening. But could she walk through them? The memory of her last public performance still haunted her. The crushing pressure in her chest, the numbness in her fingers, the blur of faces watching as she fled the stage. What if it happened again? Sophie's eyes fell on her small digital keyboard, pushed under the bed months ago when she needed floor space. She knelt and pulled it out, brushing off a layer of dust. The cheap plastic keys were nothing like the grand piano at Bellini's, but they were familiar under her fingers as she plugged in the power adapter. No sound came out. She'd have to use headphones at this hour, but Sophie didn't need to hear the notes. She closed her eyes and played the opening bars of the Chopin Ballade again, feeling the music rather than hearing it. Tonight had shown her something important. The music was still there, waiting inside her. It had survived 3 years of neglect. It had survived her attempt to bury it. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from who she truly was. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through her blinds and the unfamiliar sensation of possibility. For the first time in years, she didn't immediately think about bills or work schedules or how many bus transfers she needed to make that day. Instead, her mind replayed the music she'd performed last night and the faces of those who had listened. Her phone showed 3 missed calls. One from Eleanor Reed, one from Diane Williams, and one from Peter at Bellini's. A text from May read simply, "You're famous." With a link, Sophie clicked it, heart pounding. The link opened to a social media post by Diane Williams. Incredible hidden talent discovered at dinner last night. Below was the video of Sophie playing Rachmaninoff, her waitress uniform incongruous with the sophistication of her performance. The post already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. "Oh no," Sophie whispered, suddenly feeling exposed. She scrolled through the comments with growing alarm. Who is she? Someone sign her immediately. This gave me chills. Literally crying right now. I would pay good money to hear her in concert. That's better than half the professional pianists I've heard. The praise was overwhelming. But it was the visibility that made Sophie's chest tighten. Thousands of strangers had seen her play. What had been an intimate, unexpected moment was now public property. The familiar tendrils of anxiety began to creep around her ribs. Her phone rang in her hand. Eleanor Reed again. Sophie took a deep breath and answered. Good morning, she said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. I'm afraid our quiet plan has gotten a bit more complicated. Eleanor said without preamble. Have you seen the video? Just now. I had no idea Diane would share it publicly. She meant well, Eleanor said. But it certainly created a stir. I've received calls from 3 different colleagues asking about you. Sophie sank onto her futon. What did you tell them? Nothing yet. That's why I'm calling. We need to talk about next steps in person. Can you meet me at the foundation today? Say 11 o'clock? Sophie glanced at the time, just past 9. Yes, I can do that. Excellent. Eleanor sounded relieved. And Sophie? Don't panic about the video. This kind of attention can be managed. After hanging up, Sophie showered and dressed with unusual care, choosing her least worn jeans and a simple blue sweater that brought out her eyes. As she applied a touch of mascara, she caught herself wondering if she looked like a professional pianist, then laughed at her own reflection. What did a professional pianist even look like these days? Her phone buzzed with a text from Peter. Need to talk to you before your shift tomorrow. Good news, call me. Sophie hesitated, then texted back. Can't talk now. Meeting someone about piano. We'll call later. It felt strange typing those words. Meeting someone about piano. As if she were stepping back into a life she'd abandoned. Even stranger was Peter's immediate response. Go get him! Take all the time you need. The same manager who had once scolded her for requesting a day off to visit her sick grandmother was now cheering her musical pursuits. Amazing what a $5,000 tip could do. The Riverside Music Foundation occupied a stately stone building that had once been a library. Sophie had walked past it countless times during her conservatory days but had never been inside. Now climbing the wide steps between classical columns, she felt like an imposter in her own life. The receptionist smiled warmly when Sophie gave her name. Ms. Reed is expecting you. 3rd floor, end of the hall. The building's interior was a blend of historic architecture and modern amenities. Practice rooms lined the 2nd floor, some with doors ajar to reveal pianists, string players, and small ensembles at work. The familiar sounds, scales, arpeggios, fragments of concertos, made Sophie's fingers twitch involuntarily. Eleanor's office was spacious and sun-filled with large windows overlooking the city park. One wall held framed concert programs and photographs of Eleanor with famous musicians. Another featured a sleek digital piano. Sophie, thank you for coming. Eleanor rose from her desk to greet her. Please sit down. Sophie perched on the edge of a comfortable chair, too nervous to lean back. I'm sorry about the video going viral. I had no idea. Don't apologize, Eleanor interrupted. It's actually created an interesting opportunity. She passed Sophie a tablet open to a professional music blog. The headline read, Mystery pianist takes internet by storm, but who is she? They're calling me the Waitress virtuoso, Sophie said, skimming the article with a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. The public loves a good story, Eleanor said, taking back the tablet. Talented artist discovered in unlikely circumstances. It's practically a cultural archetype. But I'm not discovered, Sophie protested. I don't know what I am. That's what we need to figure out. Eleanor sat down across from her. The attention from this video gives us options, but it also creates pressure. I'm concerned about how that might affect your anxiety issues. Sophie appreciated the older woman's directness. I'm concerned too. Last night was different. I wasn't expecting to play, so I didn't have time to get in my head about it. But knowing people are watching, waiting for me to perform, she shook her head. That's what broke me before. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about your situation. The foundation works with a performance coach, Nora Chen. She specializes in musicians with anxiety issues. I'd like you to meet with her before we make any decisions. What kind of decisions are we talking about? The recital series I mentioned is one option. It's low pressure, small audience. But now there are others. Eleanor hesitated. The director of the city symphony called this morning. They're doing a special showcase of local talent next month. He's very interested in having you perform. Sophie's eyes widened. The city symphony? That's way beyond what I can handle right now. Perhaps, Eleanor agreed. Or perhaps not. Nora has worked wonders with musicians who thought their careers were over due to performance anxiety. She stood and walked to the digital piano. Before we discuss options, though, I need to ask you something important. She played a simple C major chord. Do you still love it? The music itself, I mean. Not the performance aspect, not the career possibilities, just the act of playing. Sophie thought about last night. How it felt when the music took over, when her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Yes, she said softly. I never stopped loving it. That's what made walking away so painful. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. Then everything else is just logistics. She returned to her desk and opened a folder. Here's what I propose. 2 weeks of intensive work with Nora, daily practice time here at the foundation, and then we reassess. No public commitments yet, she slid a paper across the desk. A simple contract offering Sophie a modest stipend for participating in what was labeled a musical rehabilitation program. The foundation has funds specifically for helping talented musicians overcome obstacles, Eleanor explained. This would cover your basic expenses so you could reduce your restaurant hours or take a short leave. Sophie stared at the contract, hardly believing what she was reading. This is incredibly generous, but it's not charity, Eleanor cut in firmly. It's investment. The music world needs artists like you, Sophie. Raw talent is rare. Everything else can be taught or managed. Before Sophie could respond, Eleanor's phone rang. She glanced at it. I need to take this. While I do, why don't you try out that piano? No pressure, just play whatever comes to mind. As Eleanor stepped into an adjoining room with her phone, Sophie approached the digital piano hesitantly. It wasn't the same as an acoustic piano, but the weighted keys felt good under her fingers. She began with simple scales, then moved into a gentle Chopin nocturne, not performing, just playing for herself. The music centered her, as it always had. Even during her darkest days at the conservatory, the actual playing had never been the problem. It was everything around it, the expectations, the competition, the judgment. When Eleanor returned, Sophie was deep in a Bach prelude, her body relaxed, her face peaceful. That answers my question, Eleanor said softly. Sophie's fingers stilled on the keys. What question? Whether this is the right path for you, Eleanor smiled. The answer is written all over your face. They spent the next hour discussing practical matters, when Sophie could meet with Nora Chen, which practice rooms would be available to her, how to handle the sudden social media attention. Keep it mysterious for now, Eleanor advised. Don't give interviews or post your own videos yet. Let's build your confidence first, then your public presence. Sophie left the foundation with a copy of the signed contract, a schedule of appointments with Nora, and a key card that would give her access to practice rooms. It all felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. On the bus ride home, her phone buzzed with a text from Richard Calloway. Have you thought about the Children's Hospital benefit? No pressure, but the committee meets tomorrow. Before she could overthink it, Sophie replied, I'm interested, but working through some performance issues first. Can I let you know in 2 weeks? His response came immediately. Of course. Take all the time you need. The invitation stands. Sophie put down her phone and gazed out the bus window at the city sliding by. 2 weeks ago, she'd been worried about making rent. Now she had a foundation stipend, a potential teaching opportunity, a possible paid performance, and a viral video. It was too much to process. When she reached her apartment building, she found May waiting on the steps. There she is, Mia exclaimed, jumping up. The internet sensation. Why aren't you answering your phone? Everyone at Bellini's is talking about you. Sophie groaned. I'm trying not to think about that video. Well, good luck with that. Louis showed it to his entire family. Peter has it playing on loop at the bar. You're officially a big deal. May studied her face. You don't look happy about it. It's complicated, Sophie admitted. Come up, I'll explain everything. In her apartment, Sophie made tea while telling May about her meeting with Eleanor and the foundation's offer. So you're really doing this? May asked, eyes wide. Going back to being a pianist? I'm giving myself 2 weeks to figure out if I can, Sophie corrected. The anxiety issues that made me quit before haven't magically disappeared. But you're getting help this time, May pointed out. That's huge, Soph. You're not dealing with it alone. Sophie nodded, warming her hands around her mug. It's still scary. What if I put all this energy into trying again and I still freeze up when it matters? Then you'll know you tried, May said simply. Isn't that better than wondering what if for the rest of your life? They talked until evening, May's practical optimism balancing Sophie's cautious hope. When May finally left, Sophie sat at her digital keyboard again, this time with headphones plugged in so she could hear the notes. She played through pieces she once knew by heart, surprised by how much her fingers remembered. Some passages were rough, others flowed as naturally as breathing. 3 years of waitressing hadn't completely erased a lifetime of training. Her phone lit up with a new text, from Peter this time, with a photo attached. It showed Bellini's marquee sign where someone had added a handwritten note, "Home of the waitress virtuoso." Despite her anxiety about the attention, Sophie laughed. Then she set her phone aside and returned to the keyboard, losing herself in the music until the city lights came on outside her window. For the first time in years, she practiced until her fingers ached. Not because a teacher demanded it or because she was competing for a spot in a prestigious program, but simply because she wanted to. Because the music called to her. Because despite everything, she was still a pianist at heart. Whether she could become one in the eyes of the world again remained to be seen. But for tonight, in her tiny apartment with her inadequate keyboard, that identity felt real and right and possible in a way it hadn't for a very long time. Tomorrow would bring challenges, the first session with Nora Chen, the curious stares from strangers who might recognize her from the video, the weight of expectations both internal and external. But tonight there was just Sophie and the music. And for now that was enough. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of practice rooms, therapy sessions, and gradual steps back into the world of music. Sophie's days, once filled with food orders and tip calculations, now revolved around scales, arpeggios, and the careful rebuilding of her confidence. Nora Chen, the performance coach Eleanor had recommended, turned out to be exactly what Sophie needed: tough but compassionate, practical rather than theoretical. Anxiety isn't your enemy, Nora told Sophie during their first session. It's just energy that needs direction. We're going to teach your body how to use that energy instead of being overwhelmed by it. The techniques were simple but effective. Breathing exercises, visualization, gradual exposure to performance settings. Sophie started by playing for just Nora, then for Eleanor, then for a small group of foundation staff. Each time, the familiar panic would begin to rise, the tightness in her chest, the cold sweat, the trembling in her fingers, and each time, she would use the tools Nora had given her to ride the wave rather than being crushed by it. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety, Nora explained. Professional musicians perform with anxiety all the time. The difference is they've learned to function with it, even channel it into their playing. Sophie practiced for hours each day on the Foundation's beautiful grand pianos, her technique coming back stronger than ever. She reduced her hours at Bellini's to just 2 shifts per week, enough to keep her job but leaving her time and energy for music. Mr. Calloway's generous tip, combined with the Foundation stipend, had given her breathing room financially for the first time in years. Peter had been surprisingly supportive of her reduced schedule, especially after a local newspaper ran a feature on the waitress virtuoso that mentioned Bellini's by name. Customers had started coming in specifically hoping to be served by Sophie, and business had picked up noticeably. Take all the time you need for your music, Peter told her. Just promise you'll still work here once in a while after you're famous. It's good for business. Sophie had laughed at that, but fame, or at least recognition, was coming faster than she'd expected. Diane Williams had connected her with 5 piano students from wealthy families, each paying $75 per hour for lessons. The teaching came naturally to Sophie, and watching her students progress gave her a different kind of satisfaction than performing. Today, however, was about performing. Sophie stood in a small backstage room at the city concert hall, breathing deeply as she had practiced with Nora. In 30 minutes, she would walk onto the stage for the Foundation's recital series, her first public performance since the disastrous day she'd fled the conservatory. Her reflection in the mirror showed a different woman than the exhausted waitress of 3 months ago. Her hair was styled simply but elegantly, and she wore a midnight blue dress borrowed from the Foundation's collection for performers who couldn't afford concert attire. Most noticeable was the change in her posture, shoulders back, chin lifted, a quiet confidence in her eyes despite the butterflies in her stomach. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Sophie called, expecting Eleanor or Nora with last-minute advice. Instead, May burst into the room carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers, followed by Luis and 3 other co-workers from Bellini's, all dressed in their best clothes and looking utterly out of place in the concert hall. "Surprise!" Mia exclaimed, thrusting the flowers at Sophie. "We couldn't miss your big comeback." Sophie laughed, genuinely touched. "You guys didn't have to come all this way. Are you kidding? We've been bragging to everyone that we work with you," Luis said, looking around the dressing room with wide eyes. "Peter wanted to come too, but someone had to run the restaurant. He sent this, though." May handed Sophie a small gift bag. Inside was a silver pin shaped like a piano. A note read simply, "Break a leg. Your table will always be waiting if you need it." Sophie pinned it to her dress, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you for bringing this, and for coming today. We got great seats," one of the other servers said proudly. "5th row center. That Mr. Calloway hooked us up when he heard we were your work friends." Sophie smiled at that. Richard Calloway had become one of her biggest supporters, attending her practice performances and offering connections throughout the city's music scene. He and his wife would be in the audience today, along with Eleanor, Diane, and her music teacher daughter, and apparently half the staff of Bellini's. 5 minutes. Ms. Bennett. A stage manager poked his head in the door. After her friends wished her luck and filed out, Sophie sat at the small practice piano in the corner of the room. She didn't play, just rested her hands on the keys and focused on her breathing. The program today was challenging but meaningful. The Chopin ballad she'd played that fateful night at Bellini's, a Debussy piece she'd loved since childhood, and Beethoven's Pathétique Sonata, which she'd been working on when she left the conservatory. It felt right to reclaim these pieces, to finish what she'd started. 2 minutes. Sophie stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the stage door. Through it, she could hear the murmur of the audience settling into their seats. The hall wasn't large, maybe 200 people, but it was a real concert venue with excellent acoustics and a stunning Steinway grand piano waiting on stage. As she prepared to make her entrance, Sophie thought about how much had changed since that night 3 months ago, when Peter had desperately volunteered her to play for the Calloway party. How a moment of terror had somehow led her back to the path she was meant to follow. "Ms. Bennett, we're ready for you." The stage door opened. Sophie walked out into the warm glow of the stage lights, the audience applauding politely as she made her way to the piano. She could make out a few faces in the front rows, Eleanor nodding encouragingly, Nora giving her a subtle thumbs up, May practically bouncing with excitement. The familiar tightness began in Sophie's chest as she sat down at the piano bench. Her heart raced, her palms dampened with sweat. For a moment, the old panic threatened to overwhelm her, the same feeling that had driven her from the stage 3 years ago. But this time, Sophie was prepared. She took 3 measured breaths, placed her slightly trembling hands on the keys, and channeled the nervous energy into the music. The opening notes of the Chopin ballade filled the concert hall. Delicate, questioning, building gradually in intensity, Sophie kept her focus on the music itself, on the communication between composer, performer, and audience, rather than on the technical challenges or the eyes watching her. When she reached the passage where she had faltered in her final conservatory recital, her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, finding each note with precision. The moment passed without incident, and Sophie felt a small surge of triumph that carried her forward into the more passionate sections of the piece. By the time she reached the thunderous conclusion, Sophie was no longer thinking about anxiety or technique. She was simply playing with her whole heart, her body swaying slightly with the music, her face reflecting the emotional journey of the piece. The final chords resonated through the hall, followed by a moment of complete silence, that magical pause that happens when an audience is truly moved. Then came the applause, warm and enthusiastic, with scattered bravos and even a few people standing. Sophie stood and bowed, her smile genuine despite the tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Not tears of fear or regret this time, but of satisfaction and release. She had made it through the first piece. She could make it through the rest, and she did. The Debussy flowed like water from her fingers, dreamy and impressionistic. The Beethoven showcased her technical skill and emotional range. From the stormy first movement to the serene adagio to the restless finale. When she played the final notes of the program and stood to acknowledge the audience, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. The entire room rose to their feet, a standing ovation led by her friends from Bellini's, who were cheering as if at a sports event rather than a classical recital. Sophie bowed deeply, overcome with emotion. 3 months ago, she had been a waitress with buried dreams and unpaid bills. Today she was a pianist again, not famous, not world-class yet, but on her way back to the life she was meant to live. Backstage after the performance, Eleanor was the first to reach her, clasping Sophie's hands in her own. "I knew you could do it," she said, her usual composure softened by emotion. "From the moment I heard you play at that dinner, I knew. I couldn't have done it without you," Sophie replied, meaning it from the bottom of her heart. "Without all of you," she added as Nora, Richard Calloway, and others gathered around to congratulate her. The foundation's director appeared with a bouquet and an announcement. "Sophie, the board was extremely impressed with your performance today. We'd like to offer you a position as our resident pianist for the coming season. It includes teaching, performing, and community outreach." Sophie stared at him in disbelief. "A real job? As a pianist?" "A real job," he confirmed with a smile. "With benefits and everything." More congratulations followed, along with an invitation from Richard Calloway to perform at his company's annual gala. "For a considerably larger fee than last time," he added with a wink. When the well-wishers finally dispersed, Sophie found herself alone for a moment with May, who had waited patiently for her chance to speak with her friend. "So," May said, grinning, "I guess this means you're not coming back to Bellini's except maybe for dinner someday?" Sophie laughed, but then grew serious. "I never thought this would happen, May. 3 months ago I was convinced that part of my life was over forever. And now? Now I know better than to say never about anything." Sophie looked around at the concert hall, still hardly believing she had just performed successfully on that stage. "I'm just grateful Peter volunteered me to play that night, even though I wanted to kill him at the time." "Remind me to thank him," May said, linking her arm through Sophie's. "Now, several extremely fancy people invited us to some reception with champagne, and I intend to take full advantage of that." As they walked toward the reception, Sophie thought about the journey of the past 3 months, the hard work, the setbacks, the breakthroughs. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Her anxiety hadn't magically disappeared. She'd simply learned to work with it rather than against it. There would be difficult performances ahead, critics who might not be impressed, competitive colleagues, and all the other challenges of a musical career. But for the first time in years, Sophie felt ready to face those challenges. She had support now, not just from Eleanor and the foundation, but from friends like May, from students who looked up to her, from audiences who connected with her playing. Most importantly, she had reconnected with the core of who she was. Not just a waitress, not just a pianist, but a person with the courage to begin again after failure. A person who could take the worst moment of her life, being forced to perform when she wasn't ready, and transform it into the first step toward healing. As she entered, the reception room filled with people eager to meet her. Sophie straightened her shoulders and touched the small piano pin from Peter for luck. The waitress virtuoso had served her last table. The pianist who had fled the stage had finally returned. Whatever came next, Sophie Bennett was ready to play on.